My sister blocked the entrance to the most exclusive luxury hotel in Manhattan, laughing loudly that I could not afford the air inside, let alone a meal. My mother joined her, whispering harshly that my cheap clothes would embarrass the family in front of my brother-in-law's wealthy investors. They had absolutely no idea that I owned the entire building and everything inside it. And when my chief of security approached the door, they were about to learn that family blindness costs dearly. My name is Riley, and I am 33 years old. I stood on the pristine pavement outside the Obsidian Manhattan's crown jewel of five-star hospitality. The evening air was crisp, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. It came directly from the two people physically blocking my path to the grand revolving glass doors. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My older sister Brittany, 35, and her husband Jamal, 36, stood with their arms crossed. Jamal, an arrogant tech startup CEO who always needed to be the loudest man in the room, pointed a manicured finger toward the street. He laughed, a booming sound that made a passing couple turn their heads. He pointed at a rusted, beat-up sedan illegally parked by a fire hydrant. "Riley, you cannot just abandon your junk car on the street like that," Jamal sneered. "The valets here drive Porsches and Bentleys. They are not going to touch that biohazard. You are going to get it towed before we even order appetizers." I did not bother telling him that the valet had already whisked my custom black Maybach into the underground VIP garage 10 minutes ago. Let him have his moment. It was the last good one he would get tonight. Brittany sighed dramatically, adjusting her designer silk scarf. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. "I told Mom we should not have invited you," she hissed. "Look at what you are wearing. Jamal is meeting a massive private equity investor tonight to secure millions for his software company. We need to project wealth and success. And you show up in a plain gray sweater. It looks like you bought it at a thrift store. Could you not try to look successful for one night in your life?" I glanced down at my sweater. It was a rare, unbranded Loro Piana cashmere piece that cost more than her entire heavily branded outfit, but explaining quiet luxury to someone who only understood giant logos was a total waste of breath. For my entire life, Brittany had been the golden child destined for greatness, while I was dismissed as the boring younger sister who pushed papers at a boring finance job. They never bothered to ask what my actual title was. If they had, they might have known I was the CEO of my own private equity firm. The doorman, dressed in a sharp maroon uniform, caught my eye. He recognized me instantly. I gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of my head, signaling him to stand down. I wanted to see exactly how far my family would take this blatant disrespect. Jamal adjusted the lapels of his flashy velvet blazer. "Listen, Riley," he said, using that condescending tone he always reserved for me. "I'm about to close a deal that will change our family legacy forever. This investor is a ghost, highly secretive, very demanding. When we go inside, do not speak unless spoken to, do not order anything weird, and please try not to look so pathetic when they bring the wine menu. I will cover your meal, obviously, since we know your little office job barely pays your rent." I kept my face completely blank. "My office job pays my rent just fine, Jamal," I replied evenly. "Oh, please," Brittany scoffed, stepping closer to block my path entirely. "You are 33 years old and single, living in some tiny apartment. Jamal is building an empire. The least you can do is not ruin his big night with your depressing energy. Remember when you ruined my 21st birthday trip to Miami because you refused to use your savings to upgrade my flight? You have always been so selfish." There it was. The classic Brittany revisionist history. I had refused to pay for her first-class ticket, using the money I earned working 2 jobs to pay for my college tuition. To this day, my family viewed my refusal to be their personal cash machine as a profound character flaw. "Are we going inside, or are we going to stand on the sidewalk all night?" I asked, my voice steady and cold. Jamal scoffed and grabbed Brittany by the hand. "Come on, babe," he said. "Let us go in before she embarrasses us out here, too. Just stay 10 paces behind us, Riley. Make it look like you are not with us." They turned and strutted toward the revolving doors, fully expecting me to trail behind them like an obedient dog. They had no idea they were walking right into my house. Before I could even take a step toward the entrance, a sleek silver town car pulled up to the curb. My mother, Diane, and my father, Richard, stepped out. My mother was draped in a heavily logoed designer coat that screamed new money, while my father adjusted a watch he had bought explicitly to impress Jamal tonight. Instead of offering a warm greeting after not seeing me for 3 months, my mother zeroed in on me like a heat-seeking missile. She marched past the doorman, grabbed me by the elbow, and yanked me hard toward the edge of the planter box away from Brittany and Jamal. "What are you doing here looking like that?" My mother hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward Jamal as if he were royalty. "I told you on the phone that tonight is crucial for your brother-in-law. If you are going to stand around acting jealous of your sister's wealthy lifestyle, you need to turn around and walk straight back to the subway." I pulled my arm out of her grip. "I am not jealous of anyone, Mom. I was invited to a family dinner. I am simply standing outside." My father stepped up beside her, crossing his arms. "Do not use that tone with your mother, Riley. We all know how you get. You always bring this dark cloud of pessimism whenever Brittany is celebrating a milestone. You cannot stand that she married a visionary, while you are stuck crunching numbers in a cubicle." My mother smoothed the front of her coat, looking at me with pure disdain. "Your father is right. Remember our family trip to Aspen 3 years ago? We had to leave you behind because you refused to pitch in for the first-class cabin, and your budget mentality would have completely ruined the luxury experience for Brittany. We will not let you ruin this dinner. Jamal is meeting a private equity titan tonight. One wrong word from you could cost him millions. If you cannot smile and play the supportive sister, just go home." The memory of that Aspen trip still burned. They had not just left me behind, they had deliberately booked the trip on the exact weekend of my 30th birthday. I had spent my milestone birthday eating takeout alone in my apartment, while they posted photos of themselves drinking champagne on the slopes. They called it protecting their peace. I called it what it was: emotional abandonment. I will not say a single word to ruin Jamal's imaginary millions. I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding with a cold, calculated fury. "I am just here for the food." My mother rolled her eyes, muttering something about my complete lack of ambition under her breath before looping her arm through my father's. They hurried to catch up with Brittany and Jamal, who were now waiting near the majestic revolving doors of the hotel lobby. I followed them at a deliberate distance, watching the grotesque display of entitlement unfold. Jamal was growing impatient. He checked his diamond-encrusted watch, shaking his head. He looked back and saw me walking toward them, his face contorted with intense irritation. To him, my sheer presence was a stain on his perfect evening. A hotel security guard in a dark, tailored suit stood near the entrance, observing the crowd. He was one of my new hires, someone who had not yet memorized the faces of upper management, but knew his job was to keep the peace. Jamal saw him and immediately snapped his fingers loudly, pointing directly at me. "Excuse me. You there. Guard." Jamal barked, his voice echoing off the marble pillars of the hotel facade. "You need to do your job and remove this loiterer. She is following my party and making my wife extremely uncomfortable. We are VIP guests here to see the manager, and I will not have this random woman stalking us into the lobby." My parents stood right there and said absolutely nothing. They watched Jamal refer to me as a random stalking loiterer, and they simply nodded in agreement. Brittany even pulled her purse closer to her chest, playing the role of the frightened, harassed, wealthy wife to absolute perfection. The security guard looked confused. He glanced at me, taking in my calm demeanor and my high-end, though understated, clothing. He then looked at Jamal, who was red in the face and waving his arms like a madman. "Sir, the sidewalk is public property," the guard replied politely. "I cannot remove someone who is just walking toward the building." "She is not just walking." Jamal shouted, stepping closer to the guard and trying to use his height to intimidate the man. I am spending thousands of dollars in your establishment tonight. I want her gone. Now. Do I need to call the police to get a beggar away from the front door? The young security guard crossed his arms unfazed by Jamal's outburst. I am sorry, sir, but I only take orders from the head of security, the guard replied calmly. Jamal's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He pulled out his phone, his thumb aggressively tapping the screen. Fine. I am calling the general manager. We will see if you still have a job in 5 minutes. You have no idea who I am. Before Jamal could press the call button, heavy measured footsteps echoed across the marble entryway. From the shadows of the grand columns emerged Vince. Vince was a towering man, an ex-military professional I had personally hired to oversee the entire security apparatus of the Obsidian. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, an earpiece discreetly tucked into his right ear. He radiated absolute authority. My family instantly brightened. Brittany nudged my mother, a vicious smirk spreading across her face. Oh, look, Brittany whispered loudly. Now she is really going to get thrown out. They sent the boss. Jamal puffed out his chest and stepped directly into Vince's path. Finally, someone with actual authority, Jamal said, pointing his phone at me like a weapon. Your junior guard here is completely useless. I am Jamal, CEO of Apex Innovations, and I am hosting a private equity dinner inside. This woman is harassing my family. I want her physically removed from the premises immediately. Vince stopped. He looked at Jamal with a blank, unreadable expression. He did not say a word to my brother-in-law. He did not even acknowledge Jamal's inflated title. Instead, Vince simply stepped around Jamal as if he were an empty coat rack. Vince walked directly over to me. He stood at attention, his posture rigid with respect. Without a single word, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a solid black metal keycard. He stepped toward a frosted glass panel adjacent to the main revolving doors, a private VIP entrance that blended so perfectly into the architecture that my family had not even realized it was a door. Vince swiped the card. A soft electronic chime rang out, and the heavy glass door glided open automatically. Good evening, ma'am, Vince said, his voice deep and entirely respectful. He bowed his head slightly, holding out his hand to guide me inside. We have been expecting you. Right this way. Please let me know if the temperature in the dining room needs adjusting. Thank you, Vince, I replied smoothly. Everything is fine. I stepped through the VIP entrance, leaving my family standing on the sidewalk in a state of absolute frozen shock. Jamal's mouth hung open, his phone suspended uselessly in the air. Brittany dropped her designer clutch. It hit the pavement with a sharp thud, but she did not even look down. My parents stared at Vince as if he had just grown a second head. The sheer silence was deeply satisfying. But the shock only lasted for about 10 seconds before the heavy revolving doors spun wildly. Jamal, Brittany, and my parents scrambled into the lobby, desperate to catch up to me. As I walked across the imported Italian marble floors of the main lobby, surrounded by soaring crystal chandeliers and lush velvet seating, the rapid footsteps of my family echoed behind me. True to form, the denial set in almost immediately. Their egos simply could not process what they had just witnessed. He thought you were someone else, Jamal insisted, catching up to walk beside me. His voice was loud, echoing off the high ceilings as he tried to regain control of the narrative. That security guy clearly mistook you for one of the actual VIP guests because you were standing so close to us. You should be careful. When they realize you are a nobody, they will have you arrested for trespassing. Brittany bent down to inspect her shoes, practically hyperventilating with annoyance. Or she slipped him a $50 bill when we were not looking, she chimed in, glaring at my back. You know exactly how she is, Jamal. She is always trying to sneak her way into places she does not belong, just to ruin my night. Mom, tell her to stop acting so entitled. My mother marched up behind me, her heels clicking sharply. "Riley." "That was incredibly embarrassing," she hissed, looking around nervously to see if any real rich people were watching us. "Stop playing these childish games. You are lucky that man was confused. Now keep your head down and walk behind Jamal like you are supposed to." I did not correct them. I did not utter a single syllable of defense. Let them weave their own delusions. I simply maintained a steady, relaxed pace toward the grand dining room. I let them build their own trap, completely blind to the fact that they were walking straight into the jaws of a financial execution. Let Jamal believe he was the king of the castle. By the end of this dinner, he would not even own the shirt on his back. The maitre d' guided us through the sprawling expanse of the main dining room. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tables draped in heavy white linen. We were led to the premier corner booth, a secluded enclave surrounded by velvet ropes offering a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. It was the best table in the house, a table usually reserved weeks in advance. My family assumed Jamal's supposed VIP status had secured it. They did not realize my executive assistant had flagged my reservation the moment I agreed to endure this family dinner. We slid into the plush leather seating. Jamal took the head of the table, instantly grabbing the heavy leather-bound wine menu from the sommelier's hands before it could even be offered to the rest of the group. Brittany sat beside him, already snapping photos of the skyline for her social media followers to prove how elite her life was. My parents took the opposite side, leaving me the small seat closest to the busy aisle. It felt highly intentional, as if I were a temporary guest they could easily slide out of the frame if I ruined their aesthetic. Jamal flipped through the thick pages of the wine list with exaggerated authority, pretending to study the regions. "I will take the Chateau Margaux Grand Cru," he announced loudly, his voice easily carrying to the neighboring tables where actual billionaires were quietly dining. "And bring the vintage. Do not try to pass off a newer year on me. I know my wine." He then snapped the menu shut, tossed it onto the table, and pointed a finger aggressively at the sommelier. "And make sure you put this entirely on my personal tab." The girl in the plain sweater at the end of the table cannot even afford the sales tax on a bottle like this, let alone the actual wine. We do not want her having a massive panic attack when the bill comes. My mother chuckled softly behind her linen napkin, completely endorsing the humiliation. Brittany smirked, not even bothering to look up from her phone screen. The sommelier, a seasoned professional named David, did not write the order down immediately. David knew exactly who I was. He had served me countless times during my private board meetings in the upper penthouse suites. Hearing a guest openly humiliate the sole owner of the hotel made him freeze in his tracks. Instinctively, David shifted his gaze away from Jamal and looked directly at me. He was waiting for my subtle nod, a silent authorization from his boss, to serve a $4,000 bottle of wine to a man acting this volatile and disrespectful. Jamal caught the hesitation. His fragile ego, already on high alert from the incident with the security guard outside, instantly cracked wide open. "Excuse me," Jamal barked, slamming his hand flat on the table. The silver cutlery rattled against the porcelain plates. "Why are you looking at her? I am the one ordering the wine. I am the one paying for the wine. Are you deaf or just completely incompetent at your job?" David took a polite, measured step back, maintaining his professional composure. "I apologize, sir," David said smoothly. "I just wanted to ensure the entire table was comfortable with the selection before uncorking such a rare vintage." Jamal was turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Comfortable. I am the CEO of a major tech firm. I am about to close a multi-million-dollar deal tonight. I could buy this entire restaurant, fire you, and replace you before the appetizers even arrive. Go get the general manager right now." My father leaned in, looking nervous about the scene Jamal was causing. "Jamal, please calm down. Let the boy just fetch the wine," my father pleaded gently, not wanting to draw more attention from the wealthy patrons around us. But Jamal was half standing up now, ready to escalate the situation into a full-blown screaming match. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I looked up at David and offered a faint, reassuring smile. "It is perfectly fine, David," I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm and steady. "Please bring the gentleman the Grand Cru. Let him enjoy it to the absolute fullest. Put it right on his tab." David caught my drift instantly. The tension left his shoulders. He bowed slightly, entirely ignoring Jamal's threat. "Right away, ma'am," David replied softly, turning on his heel to retrieve the bottle. Jamal sank back into his chair looking smug, completely unaware that I had just authorized him to hang himself with $4,000 of his own imaginary money. As David retreated toward the wine cellar, Jamal leaned back and crossed his arms, looking around the table with a triumphant smirk. "You have to show these people who is boss right from the start," Jamal declared. "If you let them walk all over you, they will treat you like a nobody. That is business 101. You establish dominance early and the rest falls into place." My father Richard nodded vigorously in agreement. He raised his crystal water goblet high in the air, gesturing for the rest of the table to do the same. "I want to propose a toast," my father announced, his chest puffed out with second-hand pride. "To Jamal. It is truly a blessing to finally have a real businessman in the family, a visionary who understands how the world actually works. It takes a certain kind of genius to secure private equity funding in this economic climate." My mother and sister clinked their glasses against his beaming with absolute adoration. My father then looked directly at me, his smile fading into a look of mild pity. "No offense to you, Riley. We know you work hard at your little finance company, but pushing papers around a cubicle for 10 years is not the same as building an empire from the ground up. You women in middle management always think you know everything because you read a spreadsheet. But Jamal is out there taking real risks. You could learn a lot from him tonight if you actually pay attention instead of sulking in the corner." The insult was meant to put me in my place, to remind me of the strict family hierarchy where I was permanently at the bottom. For 10 grueling years, I had worked 80-hour weeks. I had navigated the cutthroat world of corporate finance, orchestrated billion-dollar mergers, and built my firm Apex from a single desk into a financial juggernaut. I had sacrificed holidays, sleep, and personal relationships to achieve absolute financial dominance in Manhattan. And yet, in my father's eyes, I was just a lowly paper pusher, lacking real ambition. Meanwhile, he was practically worshipping a man who I knew for an absolute fact was currently drowning in high-interest loans and dodging calls from aggressive creditors. Jamal was a fraud in a velvet jacket, and my parents were his most gullible victims. I did not argue. I did not defend my career. I simply raised my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. "Thank you for the career advice, Dad," I replied evenly. "I will be sure to take copious notes tonight on how a real CEO operates." My mother scoffed, leaning over to whisper something to Brittany, but before Jamal could launch into another tiresome monologue about his imaginary success, the heavy velvet curtains near the kitchen entrance parted. The executive chef himself, dressed in a pristine white coat, walked toward our table. He was flanked by a senior server carrying a small silver tray covered by a gleaming cloche. The chef bypassed several tables of recognizable celebrities, athletes, and billionaire real estate developers, making a beeline directly for our corner booth. Brittany gasped immediately, grabbing Jamal by the bicep. "Oh my gosh, babe, look!" she whispered loudly, pulling her phone out of her designer clutch. "They are bringing out a VIP dish. The chef must know about your massive meeting tonight. They are rolling out the red carpet for you. This is perfect for my social media page. Get ready to smile." Jamal adjusted his velvet lapels, looking immensely satisfied. "I told you, babe," Jamal said smoothly. "They recognize power when they see it. Let them serve me." The chef reached the edge of our table. He did not look at Jamal. He did not even acknowledge Brittany or her glowing camera flash. He stepped right past my father. He stopped exactly next to my small, cramped seat at the far end of the table. With a sharp, elegant nod, he signaled the server. The server gently placed the exquisite porcelain plate directly in front of me and lifted the silver cover in one fluid motion. The rich, earthy aroma of shaved Alba white truffles over a delicate gold leaf risotto instantly filled the air. It was an off-menu masterpiece, an exclusive dish that the kitchen strictly reserved for the VVIP owners of the hotel group. A single plate of this cost more than my mother's entire outfit. "Compliments of the kitchen, ma'am," the executive chef said, bowing deeply. "We wanted to express our profound gratitude for your continued guidance. Please enjoy your evening." The chef and the server turned and walked away before anyone else at the table could even register what had just happened. Brittany froze, her phone suspended in midair. Her eyes darted wildly from the steaming, priceless truffle risotto sitting in front of me to Jamal's completely empty place setting. The smug satisfaction on her face, violently shattered, quickly replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated outrage. "What is this?" Brittany demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch that cut through the low, elegant murmur of the dining room. "Why did they give that to you?" "That was clearly meant for my husband. He is the CEO. Give that to him right now." Brittany leaned across the table, her face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and sheer envy. "There is absolutely no way they sent that to you," she hissed, her voice cutting through the elegant ambiance of the dining room. "You are sleeping with someone who works here, are you not? That is the only logical explanation. There is no way a junior finance worker gets a complimentary luxury dish at a place like the Obsidian. You are probably hooking up with that security guy at the front door, or maybe the restaurant manager." "This is completely disgusting, Riley. You are embarrassing our entire family just to get a free meal." My mother gasped immediately, clutching her pearl necklace, as if my supposed indiscretions were a physical attack on her. "Riley, how could you be so cheap?" Diane scolded, her voice dripping with profound disappointment. "If you cannot afford to eat at a place like this, you should have just stayed home. Trading favors for food is beneath us. Now push that plate over to Jamal right this instant. He is the man of the house, and he is the one hosting this dinner. It is only respectful that he gets the chef's special. You do not even appreciate fine dining anyway. Look at you, you do not even know which fork to use for a dish of that caliber. Push it over to Jamal before the food gets cold." I looked down at the steaming plate of gold leaf risotto and shaved Alba white truffles. The aroma was intoxicating, a masterpiece of culinary art. The delicate flakes of real gold shimmered under the crystal chandeliers, emphasizing the sheer exclusivity of the dish. Then I looked at my family. My sister was glaring at me with raw hatred. My mother was demanding I surrender my food to a man who had done nothing but insult me all night, and my father was nodding along, fully expecting me to comply with their insane demands. For 20 years, this was exactly how our dynamic operated. If I had something nice, it automatically belonged to Brittany. If I achieved something great, it was downplayed to protect Jamal's fragile ego. They demanded constant sacrifice from me to fuel their delusions of grandeur. They wanted me small, quiet, and constantly catering to their needs. But tonight was different. Tonight I was not the helpless younger sister they could bully into submission. I was the architect of their impending reality check. I did not push the plate across the table. I did not apologize for receiving it. Instead, I calmly picked up my heavy silver fork. I deliberately cut a generous portion of the creamy risotto, making sure to gather several large shavings of the rare white truffle. "What are you doing?" Brittany shrieked, her eyes widening in absolute horror, as if I were committing a violent crime right in front of her. "Put that down. Mom told you to give it to Jamal. He is the one closing a multi-million-dollar deal tonight, not you." I brought the fork to my mouth and took a slow, deliberate bite. The flavors were extraordinary, rich and earthy, but the absolute shock on my family's faces made it taste even better. I chewed slowly, swallowed, and gently placed my fork back down on the pristine white tablecloth. I picked up my linen napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and finally shifted my gaze directly to my brother-in-law. Jamal was staring at me with his mouth slightly open, completely baffled by my blatant refusal to obey the family hierarchy. He looked like a king who had just been slapped by a peasant. He was so accustomed to my family rolling out the red carpet for him that my simple act of eating my own food seemed like high treason. "Jamal." I said, my voice incredibly calm, slicing through the heavy tension at the table like a freshly sharpened blade. Instead of worrying about who gets to eat my appetizers, you should really be worrying about the 15% default interest rate your company hit last Tuesday. The effect of my words was immediate and catastrophic. The smug, arrogant smirk completely vanished from Jamal's face in an instant. All the color rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly as a cold sweat suddenly broke out across his forehead. For a split second, the mask slipped entirely, and I saw the pure, unadulterated terror of a man who knew his entire fraudulent empire was collapsing around him. The confident tech startup CEO was gone, replaced by a desperate con artist caught in his own web. Brittany blinked, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. She looked from me to Jamal, sensing the sudden shift in his demeanor, but lacking the financial literacy to understand exactly what I had just said. "What default rate?" Brittany asked, her voice losing its aggressive edge and replacing it with genuine panic. "Babe, what is she talking about? You told me the company was doing better than ever. You said we were closing a massive deal tonight and buying that summer house in the Hamptons. What does she mean by a 15% default interest rate? Answer me, Jamal." Jamal scrambled to recover his composure. He forced a loud, incredibly unnatural laugh that sounded more like a choke. He reached out and grabbed his crystal water goblet, his hand trembling so badly that the ice clinked loudly against the glass. He took a frantic sip, spilling a few drops onto his expensive velvet blazer. "It is nothing, babe," Jamal stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the restaurant as if expecting his creditors to leap out from behind the velvet curtains and drag him away. "It is just jealous corporate rumors. You know how these low-level finance workers are. They read some garbage blog post and think they understand high-level private equity. She is just making things up because she is bitter that I am ordering a $4,000 bottle of wine while she has to beg for free appetizers from the hotel staff. Do not listen to a single word she says. My company is completely fine. We are dominating the market." But his explanation was clumsy, and the sheer panic in his eyes told a completely different story. Even my mother looked slightly unsure for a brief moment, her eyes darting between Jamal's sweating face and my perfectly calm demeanor. However, the truth was far too uncomfortable for my family to accept. Acknowledging that Jamal was failing meant acknowledging that their golden ticket was a complete fraud, and they would much rather destroy me than face that devastating reality. My father, Richard, decided he had heard enough. His face turned a deep, furious red, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff collar. He slammed his heavy fist down on the center of the table. The sudden, violent impact made the expensive porcelain plates jump, and the silver cutlery clatter loudly against the wood. Several heads turned in our direction again, but my father did not care about the public spectacle anymore. He leaned forward, pointing a thick finger directly at my face, his eyes blazing with patriarchal wrath. "That is enough from you, Riley." My father snarled, his voice a low, threatening rumble that carried a lifetime of disappointment. "I will not sit here and listen to you spout toxic, malicious lies about your brother-in-law. You are a bitter, jealous spinster who cannot stand to see anyone else happy. You have no husband, no real career, and no future, so you come here trying to ruin your sister's marriage with these pathetic, baseless accusations. Jamal is a brilliant visionary who is actually taking care of this family, something you have never bothered to do." He paused, taking a deep, ragged breath to fuel his rage, his glare attempting to pin me to the back of my leather chair. "You are going to look Jamal in the eye right now, and you are going to give him a sincere, unconditional apology for disrespecting him in front of us. And if you refuse, you can get up, walk out of this restaurant, and never speak to this family again. I will not tolerate this kind of blatant disrespect from my own daughter. Apologize immediately, or you are entirely cut off." The heavy silence that followed my father's ultimatum hung over the table like a thick fog. He glared at me, his chest heaving fully, expecting me to shrink back, lower my eyes, and beg for forgiveness. That was the script I had followed for my entire childhood. Whenever the threat of being cut off was dangled over my head, I was supposed to panic. I was supposed to bend the knee to keep the peace. But I simply sat there, my hands resting gracefully in my lap, maintaining absolute eye contact. I did not blink, I did not flinch, and I certainly did not apologize. Seeing that his intimidation tactics were failing miserably, my father opened his mouth to escalate the situation further. But before he could shout another threat, my mother suddenly reached out and placed her hand firmly over his. The fiery rage in the air evaporated in an instant, replaced by something far more sinister. Diane's face softened into a sickeningly sweet smile, the kind of manufactured warmth she usually reserved for wealthy country club wives she secretly despised. "Richard, honey, let us take a breath," my mother said softly, patting his arm. "We do not want to cause a scene and ruin this beautiful dinner. Riley is just confused. She does not understand the complexities of the tech industry, and that is perfectly okay. We did not invite her here tonight to argue about rumors. We invited her here because she is family, and family helps each other." The whiplash was jarring. One second I was a bitter, jealous spinster facing exile, and the next I was a cherished family member who just needed a little guidance. My mother turned her plastic smile toward me, her eyes gleaming with a predatory focus. "You see, Riley," my mother continued, her voice practically dripping with artificial affection. "Jamal is doing incredibly well. His company is on the verge of a massive breakthrough, but even the most brilliant visionaries occasionally run into minor logistical hurdles before a big payout. We wanted to bring you into the fold tonight so you could be a vital part of this incredible journey." As she spoke, she reached down into her oversized designer tote bag. She pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. The edges were sharp, the paper completely uncreased. She placed it squarely in the center of the white tablecloth and pushed it past the crystal water glasses, past the untouched breadbasket, sliding it directly until it rested right next to my truffle risotto. My father cleared his throat, suddenly shifting from a furious patriarch to a casual, smooth-talking salesman. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to look entirely relaxed. "It is just a standard release form," Riley, my father explained, gesturing vaguely at the folder as if it were a casual dinner menu. "Jamal has this huge private equity deal closing tonight. But to finalize the paperwork, the investors want to see a slightly higher liquidity threshold in his corporate accounts. It is a completely standard bureaucratic requirement. Just a tiny cash flow gap we need to bridge for a few weeks. Nothing to worry about." I glanced down at the bold black lettering printed across the top tab of the folder. I knew exactly what it was before he even finished his sentence. It was the legal documentation for my grandmother's trust fund. When my grandmother passed away, she had specifically bypassed my parents and left a $2 million trust entirely in my name. She knew exactly how financially reckless my parents were, and she wanted to ensure I had a safety net they could not touch. "We need you to sign over the rights to your grandmother's trust fund," my father said, his voice terrifyingly casual. "It is $2 million sitting there doing absolutely nothing. We will transfer it into Jamal's corporate account tomorrow morning to show the investors he has solid liquid assets. Once the new funding clears next month, Jamal will put the money right back. Plus interest, of course. Think of it as a temporary loan to your own sister's future." Brittany nodded enthusiastically, her earlier rage completely forgotten now that the money was on the table. "Exactly," she chimed in, leaning forward with a greedy glint in her eyes. "You do not even need that money right now, Riley. You live in a tiny apartment and barely spend anything. Jamal and I have a lifestyle to maintain, and this new investor is going to make us billionaires. If you sign this right now, we might even let you come to the launch party." I stared at the thick legal document sitting next to my plate. The sheer audacity of their plan was staggering. They had not invited me to dinner to catch up. They had not invited me to celebrate. They had invited me here to extort $2 million to bail out a fraudulent company. I slowly reached out and flipped open the heavy manila cover. The thick stack of papers inside was printed on high-quality legal stock, the kind used by prestigious corporate law firms. I scanned the first page, my eyes quickly absorbing the dense paragraphs of legalese. As the CEO of a private equity firm, I read complex financial contracts for a living. It took me less than 30 seconds to completely dissect what I was looking at, and what I saw made my blood run absolutely cold. These were not just standard release forms. Attached to the back of the packet were copies of preliminary loan applications filed with a major commercial bank. The applications were seeking a massive line of credit for Apex Innovations, Jamal's crumbling tech startup. But Jamal did not have the collateral to secure a loan of that magnitude. Someone else had provided the collateral. I turned to the third page and stared at the signatory line. Right there, printed in dark blue ink, was my name. Riley. But it was not my handwriting. It was a clumsy, desperate forgery. My mind raced as I pieced together the timeline. The dates on the preliminary applications were from 3 weeks ago. My parents had already gone to the bank. They had already presented my grandmother's trust fund as an active asset to secure the initial stages of Jamal's loan. They had forged my signature to bypass the security checks. But the bank's legal department must have flagged the final transfer, demanding an in-person signature or a notarized final release document to actually release the $2 million into Jamal's greedy hands. The sheer scale of the betrayal slammed into me with the force of a freight train. My parents had not just made a poor financial decision, they had committed felony identity theft and wire fraud. They had leveraged my entire future, the only protection my grandmother had left me, to save a man who openly mocked me in public. And now the trap was fully set. They were not sitting here asking me for a favor. They were begging me for a retroactive pardon. If I refused to sign this final release form tonight, the commercial bank would eventually audit the failed loan application. The bank would discover the forged signatures. The authorities would be notified, and my parents would be looking at severe federal prison sentences. They knew exactly what they had done. They were banking on the fact that I would be too weak, too loyal, and too afraid of destroying the family to let them face the legal consequences of their own horrific actions. I looked up from the forged documents. My father was staring at me, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He knew that I knew. The casual salesman routine had completely vanished from his eyes, replaced by the desperate, cornered look of a man who realized his entire life was hanging by a single thread. But it was my mother who made the next move. Seeing the cold realization wash over my face, Diane immediately switched tactics. Her eyes welled up with tears on command. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times, perfected over decades of manipulating school principals, neighbors, and my father. She reached across the table, her manicured fingers trembling as she tried to grab my hand. "Riley, please, my mother," whispered her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "Do not look at us like that. We were in a desperate situation. Jamal had a deadline, and the bank was being so unreasonable with their paperwork. We only did what we had to do to protect this family. Family sacrifices for each other. That is what love is." She pulled a lace handkerchief from her purse and dabbed at her dry eyes. "Brittany needs her husband to succeed." Diane continued, her tone shifting from apologetic to defensive in the blink of an eye. "She is trying to build a family. She has a high-profile life to maintain. You have to understand the pressure we are under. You are single. You have no husband to support, no children to feed. You live alone in a tiny apartment. What do you even need $2 million for anyway? It is just sitting there being wasted while your sister's entire future is on the line." The absolute audacity of her words hung in the heavy air. She was literally trying to justify felony fraud by telling me my life had less value than my sister's. In her twisted mind, because I did not have a loud, flashy lifestyle, I did not deserve the money my grandmother had specifically left to protect me from them. I looked at Brittany. She was nodding along with my mother, her arms crossed defensively. She did not look shocked by the forgery. She looked impatient, as if I were taking too long to hand over my life savings. They all expected me to cave. They expected the obedient, quiet Riley to pick up the pen sign away her security and save them from their own criminal arrogance. They thought their guilt trip was an impenetrable fortress. They thought leveraging the concept of family loyalty would blind me to the fact that they had never once shown any loyalty to me. My grandmother had warned me about this exact moment on her deathbed. She told me to guard my independence fiercely. Now, staring at the forged signature on the crisp white paper, I finally understood the terrifying depth of her warning. I slowly reached out and placed my hand flat against the open manila folder. The restaurant around us was a symphony of clinking crystal and soft jazz, but at our table the air was thick with suffocating anticipation. They were all holding their breath, waiting for the obedient younger daughter to do what she had always done: cave under pressure, surrender her boundaries to keep the family intact. Instead, I carefully pinched the edge of the heavy cover and flipped it shut. The thick paper made a sharp, definitive smack as it closed over my forged signature. I kept my hand on top of the folder. I looked at my mother, whose fake tears were still glistening on her cheeks. I looked at my sister, whose greedy eyes were locked on the document. I looked at my brother-in-law, who was practically vibrating with desperate entitlement. Finally, I locked eyes with my father. I applied a slight pressure to the cardboard and slid the folder slowly across the smooth white tablecloth. I pushed it past the breadbasket, past the silver salt shakers, until it bumped gently against his crystal water glass. "No," I said. It was a single syllable. It was not shouted. It was not spoken with anger or hesitation. It was delivered with the calm, absolute certainty of a judge handing down a final sentence. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. The word hung in the air, completely incomprehensible to them. They had spent decades training me to bend, and their brains simply could not process the reality of my refusal. Then the table exploded into absolute chaos. My mother gasped so sharply she nearly choked. Her fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by a contorted mask of pure, vicious rage. "What do you mean, no?" she hissed, her voice dropping an octave into a terrifying guttural growl. "You are not saying no. You do not have the right to say no. We are your family. We are telling you what needs to be done. Pick up that pen right now and sign that paper, Riley." Jamal slammed his hands down on the table, leaning so far forward he was almost hovering over the centerpiece. "Are you out of your mind?" he demanded, spittle flying from his lips. "You are going to ruin my deal. Do you have any idea who I am meeting tonight? I am about to secure millions, and you are going to let this entire empire collapse over a measly $2 million that you do not even use. You are the most selfish, pathetic person I have ever met in my entire life." I did not respond to Jamal. He was a sinking ship, and his panic was just the sound of the water rushing in. My father, however, was a different story. Richard stood up entirely. He towered over the table, his face a dangerous shade of crimson. The polite, smooth-talking salesman was dead. The authoritarian dictator had returned. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "If you walk out of this restaurant without signing that document, you are no longer my daughter," my father roared, no longer caring who heard him in the exclusive dining room. "I will completely disown you. I will cut you out of the will. I will make sure no one in our extended family ever speaks to you again. You will be entirely alone in this world. You will have nothing, and you will be nothing. You are going to sign that paper right now, or you are dead to me. Do you understand?" I looked up at him, my expression entirely unreadable. "You cannot cut me out of a will that has nothing in it, Dad," I replied softly. "And being dead to you sounds like a massive promotion." That was the breaking point for Brittany. My sister let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She grabbed her heavy crystal water goblet, which was filled to the brim with ice and sparkling water. Without a second of hesitation, she hurled the contents violently across the table directly at me. The freezing water hit me square in the chest. Ice cubes struck my collarbone and tumbled down into my lap, clattering loudly against the expensive porcelain plate. The icy liquid soaked instantly through my rare cashmere sweater, chilling my skin and dripping down the edge of the leather chair onto the marble floor. Brittany stood there, chest heaving, the empty glass clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "Sign the paper, you ungrateful little brat," she screamed. The entire dining room had gone dead silent. Dozens of wealthy patrons and hotel staff were now staring directly at our table. My family stood around me, panting with rage, waiting for me to cry. They expected me to jump up in shock, to break down in tears of humiliation, to finally shatter under the weight of their combined abuse. I did not flinch. I did not gasp when the freezing water hit my skin. I did not even break eye contact with my sister. I remained perfectly seated, my hands still folded elegantly in my lap. I slowly blinked, letting a single drop of water roll down my cheek. The absolute silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. They had fired their best shot, and I had not even blinked. The power dynamic had permanently shifted, and they were completely terrified. I slowly reached up and wiped the freezing water from my cheek with the back of my hand. I picked up my pristine white linen napkin and deliberately dabbed at the soaked collar of my cashmere sweater. The quiet scrape of my chair sliding back slightly was the only sound in the suffocating silence. I looked directly at Jamal, bypassing my sister entirely. "You want to talk about family sacrifices, Jamal?" I began, my voice carrying a lethal calmness that echoed across the table. "You want to talk about bridging a tiny cash flow gap for your brilliant tech empire? Let us talk about where your current funding actually went, because I assure you it did not go into software development." Jamal swallowed hard. His eyes darted nervously toward my father, who was still standing, his hand frozen mid-air. "What are you talking about?" Jamal stammered, his voice lacking all of its previous booming authority. "You do not know anything about my company." "I know everything about your company," I replied smoothly. "I know that over the last 6 months, Apex Innovations has produced exactly 0 lines of viable code. You have no beta product. You have no engineering team, but you do have expenses. Massive, glaring expenses. For instance, the 2 brand new sports cars you purchased under the company name, a matte black Lamborghini and a custom Porsche, both currently sitting in a private garage that costs $3,000 a month to rent." Brittany dropped the empty water goblet. It clattered against her porcelain plate. "A Lamborghini," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You told me we were leasing a sensible sedan for client meetings. I did not stop there." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, locking my gaze onto Jamal's sweating face. "And let us not forget the real estate investments," I continued mercilessly. "You signed a 2-year lease on a luxury penthouse condo in Tribeca. Rent is $18,000 a month, paid directly from the corporate account. But you do not use it as an office, do you, Jamal? You use it to house a 22-year-old social media influencer named Lexi. You even used the corporate credit card to buy her a $60,000 diamond tennis bracelet last Tuesday. The exact same Tuesday your company officially defaulted on its high-interest loans." Brittany let out a guttural sob. "A diamond bracelet," she choked out, looking down at her own bare wrists. "You told me we had to tighten our budget this month for the upcoming launch. You told me I could not buy the winter boots I wanted because the company needed every single dime." My father looked like he was going to be physically sick. The tyrannical rage from moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by the sheer paralyzing terror of a man realizing his entire life savings were gone. "You rented a penthouse for a girl," Richard whispered, his voice shaking. "I mortgaged my retirement home to secure your credit line. I forged my own daughter's signature to keep you afloat. And you bought sports cars." Jamal realized he was losing his most gullible investors. He had to deflect, and he had to do it violently. "That is a lie," Jamal shouted, his voice cracking. He slammed both of his hands onto the table and pushed himself up, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. It hit the floor with a loud crash. He was frantic, a cornered animal, realizing all the exits were sealed. "She is lying. She hacked my accounts. This is a federal crime. She is trying to destroy my reputation with fabricated corporate espionage because she has always been jealous of us." He was pointing at me, his finger trembling uncontrollably. Do not listen to a word she says, Brittany. She is a psychotic, jealous spinster. She paid someone to hack into my private servers to steal my financial data. That is illegal. I am going to have her thrown in federal prison for this. Jamal was practically hyperventilating. His eyes wildly scanned the room, desperately looking for an authority figure to rescue him from his own collapsing lies. He spotted the restaurant manager standing near the entrance of the VIP section. It was Mr. Cohen, the man who had authorized the $4,000 bottle of wine earlier. Manager Jamal bellowed, waving his arms frantically to get the man's attention. "Manager, get over here right now. I need security immediately." Several nearby diners stopped eating entirely, openly watching the spectacle unfold. My father sank back into his chair, looking like a deflated balloon, his eyes fixed blankly on the forged trust fund documents still sitting on the table. He was slowly doing the math, realizing the absolute catastrophe he had created for himself. "This woman is a corporate spy!" Jamal screamed as Mr. Cohen began walking swiftly toward our table. "She has illegally accessed my private financial records. She is harassing a VIP guest. I demand that you call the police and have her forcibly removed from this hotel. If you do not throw her out onto the street this very second, I will sue this entire establishment for every penny it is worth. I will have your job. Get her out of my sight." I did not move. I did not attempt to defend myself against his wild accusations. I simply sat there, my clothes soaking wet, my hands perfectly still, waiting for the final piece of the trap to snap shut. Jamal thought he was summoning a bouncer to throw out a peasant. He had absolutely no idea he had just summoned my employee to execute his ultimate financial ruin. Mr. Cohen approached our table with swift, measured steps. His expression was a perfect mask of professional courtesy, giving absolutely nothing away. Jamal stood taller, adjusting his velvet blazer, preparing to deliver the final blow that would see me humiliated and dragged out of the dining room. But before Jamal could utter another command to my manager, my father suddenly intervened. Richard had been staring at the table, his mind spinning from my revelations about the sports cars and the penthouse. For a moment, I thought he might actually hold Jamal accountable. I thought the sheer financial terror of losing his retirement might finally override his desperate need to impress his son-in-law. But I had underestimated the toxic pride of a narcissist. Admitting that he had been conned by Jamal meant admitting that he was a fool. It meant admitting that I, the daughter he despised, was right all along. And Richard would rather lose everything than ever admit I was right. "Wait," my father barked, holding up his hand to stop Mr. Cohen from speaking. "This is a family matter. We do not need security. We just have a jealous daughter who is trying to cause a scene because she cannot stand her sister's success." Jamal looked surprised, but quickly adapted, sensing that my father was about to double down on his delusion. "Exactly," Jamal chimed in, glaring at me. "She is just spewing venom. She knows nothing about my business operations. Apex Innovations is rock solid, and anyone who says otherwise is a liar." My father nodded frantically. He looked at Jamal, his eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. "I know you are rock solid, Jamal," my father said, his voice trembling slightly. "I know these are just lies. You are a visionary, and I am going to prove to this bitter girl right now that my faith in you is absolute. I am not going to let her malicious rumors ruin this dinner or your massive deal tonight." Richard reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. He grabbed the thick manila folder that contained the forged trust documents. He flipped it over to the blank back cover and slammed it onto the table directly in front of him. Diane watched him, her eyes wide with confusion. "Richard, what are you doing?" she asked nervously. "I am putting an end to this nonsense once and for all," he declared loudly, making sure I was watching his every move. He uncapped the gold pen and began to write furiously across the heavy cardboard surface. He spoke the words aloud as he wrote, ensuring every single person at the table heard the legal terms he was drafting. "I, Richard, do hereby unconditionally pledge the full equity of my primary residential property located in Fairfield as collateral to secure any and all current corporate debts held by Apex Innovations." He paused, his pen scratching loudly in the silent dining room. I offer this promissory note as a guarantee of my absolute faith in the solvency and leadership of my son-in-law Jamal. This pledge is legally binding and supersedes any previous financial arrangements. Brittany gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh my gosh, Dad," she breathed, looking at him as if he were a superhero. "That is so generous. You are amazing." Jamal's eyes lit up with predatory greed. The panic from moments ago vanished, replaced by a smug, victorious grin. He looked at me, his chest puffed out fully, believing he had just won the ultimate victory. "See that?" Riley Jamal sneered. "That is what real family loyalty looks like. Your own father would rather bet his entire house on my success than believe a single word of your pathetic, jealous lies." Richard finished writing. He signed his full legal name at the bottom of the makeshift contract with a flourish. He then pushed the manila folder across the table, sliding it directly into Jamal's waiting hands. Jamal grabbed it eagerly, treating it like a winning lottery ticket. Diane clapped her hands together, tears of pride welling in her eyes. "You see, Riley?" My mother said, her voice dripping with venom. "We do not need your little trust fund anyway. Your father just proved that we stand together. Now you can sit there in your wet clothes and watch us celebrate, or you can leave." I did not leave. I sat perfectly still, my wet sweater clinging to my skin, and watched them celebrate their supposed victory. I watched my father beam with toxic pride. I watched Jamal fold the makeshift promissory note and tuck it safely into his velvet jacket. They thought they had just put me in my place. They thought they had secured their glorious future. But as I looked at the smug faces of my family, all I saw were three people who had just voluntarily wrapped a legal noose around their own necks and handed me the rope. By signing that paper, my father had just legally transferred his last remaining asset directly into Jamal's toxic debt pool, and he had done it right in front of the very person who owned that exact debt. Mr. Cohen finally reached the edge of our velvet-roped corner booth. He was a veteran of the luxury hospitality industry, a man who had managed the most exclusive dining rooms in the world and was entirely accustomed to dealing with temperamental billionaires, royalty, and high-profile celebrities. He moved with a quiet, undeniable authority, his posture perfectly straight, his expression a completely unreadable mask of professional courtesy. Jamal immediately turned his attention to the manager. He aggressively waved the manila folder containing my father's newly signed promissory note in the air, as if it were a royal decree. "It took you long enough," Jamal snapped, his voice loud and grating purposefully, trying to draw the attention of the surrounding elite diners. "I need this woman removed from the premises immediately. She is a corporate spy and she has been aggressively harassing my family since we walked through the front door. I want the police called right this second. I want her arrested for illegal data breach and criminal trespassing." Brittany nodded vigorously, pointing her manicured finger directly at my soaked, freezing sweater. She threw a massive fit and tried to ruin our entire dinner. My sister lied effortlessly, completely ignoring the blatant fact that she was the one who had just hurled a full glass of ice water at my chest. "My husband is a very important VIP guest here. We spend thousands of dollars at this establishment. You need to have your security guards drag her out of here before she causes any more physical damage to your restaurant." My mother Diane chimed in, clutching her pearl necklace and putting on her best distressed victim face. "It is truly a tragedy." "Manager," my mother sighed dramatically. "She is deeply unwell and refuses to get the psychological help she so desperately needs. We only invited her tonight out of the goodness of our hearts, but she has completely crossed the line. Please just take her away so we can finish our celebration in peace." My father leaned back in his heavy leather chair, folding his arms across his chest with an air of absolute superiority. "I apologize for the public disturbance," my father said, using his condescending business tone. "As my son-in-law stated, we are celebrating a massive private equity deal tonight. Do whatever you have to do to get this estranged daughter of mine out of our sight, and make sure she pays for any damages she caused to the upholstery." Mr. Cohen stood perfectly still at the edge of the table. He did not pull out a notepad to take down their complaints. He did not signal for the large security guards who were now quietly lingering near the grand entrance of the dining room. He did not even offer a polite nod of acknowledgement to Jamal, Brittany, or my parents. The heavy silence stretched for several agonizing seconds. Jamal's smug, victorious smile began to falter slightly under the manager's cold, unresponsive gaze. "Did you hear me?" Jamal demanded, taking an aggressive step toward Mr. Cohen and puffing out his chest. "I said, call the police and get this crazy woman out of my sight. Do you want me to call the corporate office and have you fired?" Mr. Cohen completely ignored the raving tech CEO. He did not blink. He simply stepped smoothly around Jamal, treating my arrogant brother-in-law as if he were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture blocking the aisle. Mr. Cohen approached my side of the table. He raised his right hand in a very subtle, precise gesture. From the shadows of the kitchen entrance, the senior server who had brought my truffle risotto appeared instantly. The server was holding a polished silver tray. Resting in the center of the tray was a thick, pristine white luxury towel, gently steaming and radiating a subtle, calming scent of eucalyptus and lavender. Mr. Cohen picked up the heated towel with a pair of silver tongs. He leaned forward and held it out toward me with absolute, undeniable reverence. His entire demeanor shifted from cold stone to profound respect. "I deeply apologize for the unacceptable disturbance," Boss Mr. Cohen said, his voice carrying clearly and firmly across the dead, silent dining room. "Are you all right? Shall I have security escort these individuals out of your restaurant?" The words dropped onto the table like a live grenade. Jamal froze his mouth, hanging completely open, his brain short-circuiting as it desperately tried to process the sentence he had just heard. Brittany dropped her phone, the device clattering loudly against the base of her water glass. My mother let out a tiny strangled gasp, the manufactured tears instantly drying up in her eyes. My father stared at Mr. Cohen, his face draining of all color, his eyes darting frantically between the manager, the steaming luxury towel, and me. I calmly reached out and took the heated towel from Mr. Cohen. I draped it gracefully over my soaked shoulders, letting the soothing warmth seep into my freezing skin. "I am perfectly fine, Mr. Cohen," I replied smoothly, looking directly into Jamal's terrified eyes. "But you might want to lock the doors. We have a lot of unpaid debts to settle at this table." The silence that followed my words was so absolute that I could hear the faint clinking of silverware from the opposite side of the massive dining room. My family sat completely immobilized, trapped in a collective state of paralysis. They stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes, trying to process an impossible reality. The poor, pathetic sister they had spent 33 years stepping on was sitting at the best table of the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, being addressed as boss by the general manager. Brittany was the first to break the silence. She let out a high, breathy laugh that sounded entirely unhinged. She looked around the table, her eyes darting frantically from Jamal to my parents, desperately seeking someone to validate her denial. "Is this some kind of prank?" Brittany asked, her voice trembling as she forced another nervous giggle. "Seriously, Riley, did you pay this guy to come over here and say that? Because it is not funny. It is just weird. You do not own a hotel. You live in a tiny apartment. Jamal, tell him to stop playing around. This is highly unprofessional." Jamal swallowed heavily. The arrogant tech CEO facade was visibly crumbling, replaced by the terrified realization of a cornered fraud. He looked up at Mr. Cohen, attempting to summon his previous booming authority, but his voice came out thin and shaky. "Listen to me," Jamal stammered, pulling at his velvet collar as if it were suddenly choking him. "I do not know what kind of bizarre game you two are playing, but I am not amused. I am a paying VIP customer. I am hosting a private equity dinner. You are going to bring me my $4,000 bottle of wine right now, and then I am calling the corporate office to have you terminated for this ridiculous stunt." Mr. Cohen did not flinch. He did not apologize, and he certainly did not look intimidated. Instead, he smoothly reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and withdrew a sleek black iPad encased in leather. He tapped the screen once, his face remaining a perfect mask of polite indifference. He held the iPad out, turning the bright screen directly toward Jamal so that the entire table could clearly see the glaring red notification. "There is no game being played, sir," Mr. Cohen said, his voice cold and perfectly level. "And I am afraid I cannot bring you the Grand Cru vintage you ordered. Your corporate credit card has just been declined for insufficient funds." The words echoed sharply around our table. Brittany gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. My father leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the red declined message flashing on the screen. He looked at the iPad, then down at the manila folder containing the promissory note he had just aggressively signed and handed to Jamal. The catastrophic reality of what he had just done began to dawn on his aging face. My mother looked as if she were about to faint, her manicured hands gripping the edge of the tablecloth so tightly her knuckles turned stark white. Jamal's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. He reached out and snatched his useless plastic card off the small silver tray Mr. Cohen had placed on the table earlier. "That is impossible," Jamal hissed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "It is a bank error. My company has millions in active capital." "Run it again. Or run it under my personal name. Do you know who I am?" Mr. Cohen retrieved his iPad, holding it casually at his side. "I know exactly who you are, sir," Mr. Cohen replied, completely unfazed by Jamal's desperate outburst. "You are a guest who has attempted to purchase luxury items without the necessary capital. We have run the card 3 times. The bank has officially frozen the account due to severe delinquency." Jamal slumped back into his chair, the fight completely draining out of him. He looked like a deflated balloon. Brittany stared at him, horror washing over her features as the reality of my earlier warnings finally began to set in. The sports cars, the penthouse, the influencer, all of it was suddenly clicking into absolute place. And for the record, Mr. Cohen added, his voice slicing through their collective shock like a scalpel. "You cannot call the corporate office to have me terminated. The corporate office is located on the penthouse floor of this very building. And Ms. Riley does not just work there, she owns the Obsidian Hotel Group entirely. She bought the property 2 years ago through her private equity firm. She is my sole employer, and she is the absolute owner of every single thing you see in this room." If my previous statements had been a grenade, Mr. Cohen's clarification was a nuclear bomb. The sheer magnitude of my wealth hit them all at once. My father's jaw actually dropped open. The daughter he had just threatened to disown, the daughter he had just dismissed as a lowly paper pusher, was a billionaire. She owned the very ground they were sitting on. My mother let out a small, pathetic whimper. All the arrogant superiority they had carried into the hotel had been entirely vaporized in a matter of seconds. They had spent the entire evening treating me like dirt on their shoes, fully believing they held all the power. Now they were sitting in my restaurant, drowning in their own fraudulent debts, while I sat comfortably draped in a heated luxury towel. The trap had fully closed. The silence broke, not with an apology, but with the sound of my mother scraping her heavy leather chair backward. Diane stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her crystal water glass. The absolute horror on her face instantly morphed into something far more grotesque. It was a look of pure, unadulterated greed. Her brain had completely bypassed the fact that they had just spent 2 hours verbally abusing me. She had erased the memory of Brittany throwing ice water on my chest. She looked at me not as a daughter she had wronged, but as a winning lottery ticket she had just found lying on the pavement. "Oh my goodness, Riley!" My mother shrieked, her voice echoing with a sickeningly sweet pitch that made my skin crawl. She practically lunged across the table, her arms outstretched, aiming to wrap me in a tight, suffocating hug. A hotel owner. My own daughter owns the Obsidian. Why on earth did you not just say so from the very beginning? You have been holding out on us, you naughty girl. I stood up and took a swift, deliberate step backward, letting the heated luxury towel drape securely over my soaked shoulders. I completely avoided her embrace. She grasped at empty air, her heavy diamond rings flashing under the warm glow of the chandeliers. She did not even seem to care or notice that I had physically rejected her affection. Her wide eyes were already darting around the opulent dining room, mentally calculating the net worth of the imported marble pillars, the velvet drapery, and the elite clientele sitting around us. "This changes absolutely everything," Diane declared, clapping her hands together and turning to look at Jamal and my father. "Richard, do you hear this? We do not need to worry about those aggressive bank loans anymore. Riley is rich. Riley, sweetheart, this is perfect timing. You can just go down to the hotel register right now and pull out whatever cash Jamal needs to clear his debt. Or just write a business check from the hotel account. You own the place, so it is basically your personal piggy bank. Family saves family, right?" The sheer arrogant ignorance of her statement was astounding. She genuinely believed a multi-billion-dollar international hotel group operated like a neighborhood lemonade stand. She thought I could just reach into a cash drawer and casually hand over millions of dollars to a man who had spent the entire evening publicly berating me. Her entitlement was a bottomless pit completely devoid of shame or self-awareness. Brittany was still staring blankly at her phone, her mind desperately trying to reconcile the fact that the sister she had bullied and belittled her entire life was now infinitely more powerful and wealthy than she could ever hope to be. But Jamal Brittany whimpered, looking over at her husband with tear-filled eyes. "You said she was just a paper pusher. You said we were the successful ones. You promised me we were going to be billionaires." Jamal could not even look at his wife. He was staring down at his empty plate, his chest heaving rapidly, trapped in a terrifying nightmare of his own making. The arrogant swagger was entirely gone. The fake tech visionary was dead, leaving only a panicked man facing absolute financial ruin and public humiliation. I looked back at my mother, who was still smiling expectantly, waiting for me to pull out a checkbook and magically solve all of their self-inflicted problems. The smile on her face was the exact same manipulative smile she used when she forced me to give up my childhood bedroom so Brittany could have a walk-in closet. It was the smile of a predator who expected her prey to willingly walk into the trap. "I am not your piggy bank, Mom," I said, my voice dropping the temperature in the room by another 10 degrees. "And I am certainly not bailing out a man who uses corporate funds to rent penthouses for a 22-year-old girl. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences." I turned my attention away from my mother and her shocked, gaping mouth. I looked directly at Mr. Cohen. The seasoned manager stood at attention, his hands clasped neatly behind his back, waiting for my final directive. He had witnessed the entire grotesque display of family toxicity, and his professional disdain for my relatives was palpable even beneath his polished exterior. "Mr. Cohen," I said calmly, adjusting the warm eucalyptus-scented towel around my neck, "please bring the final bill for this table immediately. Charge the $4,000 bottle of wine and the $2,000 worth of food directly to my father's credit card. Do not apply a single courtesy discount." Richard jolted in his heavy leather seat as if he had been struck by lightning. "What?" my father gasped, his face turning a sickly shade of pale. "Riley, you cannot do that. You just said you own the entire place. You cannot make me pay $6,000 for a single dinner. I just pledged my house to Jamal. I do not have that kind of liquid cash right now." "I can, and I am," I replied smoothly. "You are the one who ordered the premium food, Dad. You are the one who proudly toasted to Jamal's brilliance. Consider this massive bill a celebration tax for your golden child." I looked back at the manager, making sure my instructions were absolute. "Mr. Cohen," I continued, my voice unwavering and sharp, "run my father's card for the full $6,000. If the card bounces, or if he attempts to dispute the charge in any way, do not hesitate. Lock the dining room doors and call the police immediately. Have them all arrested for theft of services." Mr. Cohen bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement of my command. "Understood, boss," he replied smoothly. He turned his attention to my father, extending his hand, palm up, waiting for the payment. Richard sat completely frozen. His hand hovered over his chest pocket, where he kept his wallet. He looked around the dining room. The surrounding tables, which had previously been trying to politely ignore our loud family, were now openly staring. Wealthy socialites, tech investors, and real estate magnates watched with undisguised fascination as a man who had been screaming threats just minutes ago was now being forced to pay up. Every single eye in the room was locked on his trembling hands. "Give him the card, Dad," Brittany whispered, her voice shaking with panic. "Just pay it so we can get out of here before they actually call the cops." Richard swallowed hard, pulling his leather wallet from his jacket. His fingers were trembling so violently, he dropped a few business cards onto the table before finally extracting his premium platinum credit card. He handed it to Mr. Cohen with a defiant glare, trying to salvage some shred of his shattered dignity. "There is plenty of room on that card," Richard muttered defensively. "I have excellent credit. Just run the charge and let us leave." Mr. Cohen did not argue. He retrieved a sleek portable payment terminal from his jacket pocket. He inserted the platinum card and quickly tapped in the total amount of $6,000. The machine processed for 3 agonizing seconds. Then it emitted a sharp, loud beep. The screen flashed a bright, undeniable red. "Declined." Mr. Cohen announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. Richard jumped out of his seat. "That is impossible," he shouted, pointing at the machine. "It must be a fraud alert. My bank always flags large restaurant charges to protect my assets. Run it again. Run it manually. You are doing it wrong." Mr. Cohen remained perfectly calm. He pressed a few buttons and ran the card a second time. The machine processed. It beeped loudly again. Red screen. "It is not a fraud alert, sir," Mr. Cohen stated flatly. "The terminal explicitly states insufficient funds. Your card is maxed out. Do you have another form of payment, or shall I contact the authorities now?" The blood completely drained from my father's face. He slumped back into his chair, his confident facade crumbling into absolute dust. I knew exactly why his premium card was maxed out. He had been quietly paying the minimum balances on all his accounts for months, secretly siphoning his liquid cash to cover the initial fraudulent loans for Jamal's fake tech company. He had drained his own financial lifeblood to protect a con artist, and now he could not even afford to pay for his own dinner. The patriarch who demanded absolute respect from everyone was officially broke. My mother covered her face with her hands, letting out a low, humiliated sob. "We are going to jail," Diane cried, rocking back and forth in her chair. "We cannot pay. They are going to arrest us right here in front of everyone." While my parents spiraled into a state of total panic, I noticed movement at the head of the table. Jamal was slowly standing up. He kept his eyes locked on the floor, sliding his chair back as quietly as possible. He adjusted his velvet blazer, trying to look casual as he stepped away from the booth. "Where are you going, Jamal?" Brittany asked, her voice shrill and desperate. "You cannot leave us here. You have to pay this. You said you were a millionaire. I just need to make a quick phone call." Jamal lied smoothly, not looking his wife in the eye. "I am going to call my bank and have them wire the funds directly to the hotel. I will be right back. Just stay here." He did not wait for a response. Jamal turned and began speed walking toward the grand entrance of the dining room. He was abandoning his wife. He was abandoning his in-laws. He was leaving them to face the police and the massive bill while he tried to slip out into the Manhattan night like the coward he truly was. He made it about 50 feet, weaving through the tables of staring patrons. He was almost at the velvet ropes near the host stand. He reached out his hand to push past the barrier. Suddenly, a massive figure stepped directly into his path, blocking the exit entirely. It was Vince. My head of security crossed his muscular arms over his chest, staring down at Jamal with absolute authority. 2 other large security guards materialized from the shadows of the lobby, stepping up to flank Vince on either side. They formed an impenetrable human wall of tailored suits and cold efficiency. "Excuse me," Jamal stammered, taking a quick step backward. "I need to use the restroom in the lobby. Get out of my way." Vince did not move a single inch. "Nobody leaves the dining room, sir," Vince said, his deep voice echoing with terrifying finality. "The doors are officially locked until the bill is settled. Please return to your seat." Jamal looked frantically toward the side exits, but two more guards had already moved to block those doors as well. He was completely trapped. The tech visionary, the arrogant brother-in-law who had demanded I be thrown out into the street just 20 minutes ago, was now a prisoner in my restaurant. He slowly turned around, facing the long walk of shame back to our table, his absolute defeat broadcasted to the entire room. Every step he took back toward us was heavy, with the realization that his empire of lies had completely collapsed. There was no escape. Jamal dragged his feet across the imported Italian marble floor. The confident stride of the arrogant tech CEO had completely evaporated, replaced by the heavy shuffling steps of a condemned man walking to the gallows. He reached our corner booth and collapsed into his leather chair. He did not look at Brittany. He did not look at my parents. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on his empty porcelain plate, his hands trembling violently in his lap. "What happened?" Brittany demanded, her voice a frantic, desperate whisper. "Did you call the bank? Are they wiring the money? Jamal, say something right now." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his public ruin. My father was staring at Jamal with a mixture of profound disgust and rising panic. The $6,000 restaurant bill was still sitting on the silver tray in Mr. Cohen's hands, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Before the silence could stretch any further, the heavy velvet curtains near the VIP entrance parted once again. A woman in a sharply tailored navy blue suit walked into the dining room. It was my executive assistant, Claire. She moved with absolute purpose, her heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. She ignored the stares of the wealthy patrons and bypassed the security guards, making a beeline directly for our table. In her right hand, Claire carried a sleek, heavy black leather briefcase. It was not a standard corporate bag. It was the kind of reinforced locked case used to transport highly sensitive financial data and final legal notices. My mother watched Claire approach, her eyes widening in confusion. "Who is this now?" Diane muttered, her voice trembling as she clutched her pearl necklace. "What is going on here, Riley?" I did not answer my mother. Claire reached my side of the table. She gave me a brief, respectful nod. "Good evening, boss," Claire said calmly. "I have the finalized paperwork you requested. The forensic audit is complete, and the legal team has signed off on all the required actions for tonight." "Thank you, Claire," I replied smoothly. "You can set it right here." Claire placed the heavy leather briefcase squarely on the white tablecloth, right next to the plate of cold truffle risotto my family had demanded I surrender earlier. She took a step back and stood quietly at attention. I reached out and rested my hands on the cool leather. I slowly pushed my thumbs against the twin polished silver latches. The sharp metallic click of the lock springing open echoed loudly in the tense silence of our booth. I lifted the lid back. Inside, nestled in dark velvet compartments, were several thick stacks of legal documents. But these were not standard contracts or investment proposals. The top page of every single stack was stamped with heavy, glaring red ink. The words "default foreclosure" and "asset seizure" were printed in massive letters across the pristine white paper. I reached in and pulled out the thickest stack of documents, dropping it onto the table with a heavy thud. Jamal stared at the red stamps. His breathing became erratic, his chest heaving as if the air had been suddenly sucked out of the room. He looked from the papers to the open briefcase, and that was when his eyes locked onto the interior lid. Embossed directly into the black leather in crisp silver lettering was a corporate logo, a sleek geometric mountain peak with a single word printed beneath it: Apex. "You have been bragging a lot tonight about a massive deal, Jamal," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "You proudly told my father that you were meeting a highly secretive, incredibly wealthy private equity titan tonight. A mystery investor who was going to inject millions of dollars into your failing startup and save you from the massive high-interest hard money loans you defaulted on last week. Jamal could not speak. He just stared at the silver logo, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Brittany looked at the briefcase, then at Jamal. Apex Private Equity. She read aloud, her voice shaking with terror. That is the firm. That is the firm Jamal has been trying to contact for months. He said they were the only ones who could bail us out. I reached out and slowly turned the briefcase so the embossed logo was facing Jamal directly. You were right about one thing, Jamal, I said, leaning forward. Apex Private Equity is a massive firm. We control billions of dollars in commercial real estate and distressed corporate debt across the eastern seaboard. But you were entirely wrong about everything else. There is no mystery investor coming to save you tonight. My father leaned forward, his face completely pale, his eyes locked on the red-stamped foreclosure documents. Riley, what does this mean? Richard asked, his voice a hollow, terrified rasp. It means, I replied smoothly, looking right into Jamal's terrified eyes, that I am the founder, CEO, and majority shareholder of Apex Private Equity. You did not come here tonight to meet a savior. You came here to meet your executioner. The silence in the room was deafening. Jamal stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He shook his head slowly from side to side, refusing to accept the reality sitting right in front of him. That is impossible, Jamal whispered, his voice cracking. Apex Private Equity manages billions. It is a massive Wall Street institution. You are just a junior analyst. You push papers. You told us you just push papers. I never told you I just pushed papers, Jamal, I replied, my voice calm and perfectly measured. My father told you that. And you believed him because it fit your fragile ego perfectly. You needed to be the smartest, most successful person in the room. You could not fathom the idea that the quiet sister you constantly belittled was actually building a financial empire while you were out renting sports cars and playing pretend CEO. Jamal gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. No, he stammered, his eyes darting wildly. I have been communicating with the senior partners at Apex for weeks. They reviewed my portfolio. They loved my vision. They promised me a massive capital injection tonight to cover my overhead. They said the mystery investor was going to wipe out my short-term debt and fund my entire national launch. I reached into the open briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of printed emails. I tossed them onto the table. They scattered across the white linen landing right next to his empty wine glass. Read the signature lines, Jamal, I commanded. He hesitated, then slowly reached out with a trembling hand to pick up the top email. His eyes scanned the text. It was the exact correspondence he had been having with my firm. But at the very bottom below the corporate letterhead was my electronic signature, authorizing every single message. I am the mystery investor, Jamal, I said, leaning forward so he could hear every single syllable clearly. And I did not come here to bail you out. I came here to execute the foreclosure. The words struck him with physical force. He slumped back in his chair as if he had been punched in the stomach. Let me explain exactly how this works, I continued, ensuring my family heard every detail of his financial incompetence. 6 months ago, you ran out of the initial seed money you conned out of my parents. So you went to the shadow market. You took out a $5 million hard money loan from an unregulated private lender. You agreed to a catastrophic 15% monthly interest rate because you were desperate to keep up the facade of your wealthy lifestyle. Brittany let out a choked sob. $5 million, she cried, grabbing her hair. Jamal, what did you do? I ignored her and kept my eyes locked on Jamal. When you defaulted last Tuesday, that private lender immediately put your distressed debt up for auction, I explained smoothly. And my firm, Apex Private Equity, swooped in and purchased that debt for pennies on the dollar. We bought the paper. That means you no longer owe a faceless bank, Jamal. You owe me. My father let out a strange wheezing sound. He looked down at his own hands, his chest heaving as the horrific truth finally clicked into place. The promissory note, Richard gasped, his voice barely a whisper. The note I just signed. I looked over at my father, offering him a cold, empty smile. Exactly, Dad, I said. 5 minutes ago, you wrote a legally binding promissory note guaranteeing Jamal's corporate debt with the full equity of your retirement home. You handed it to Jamal to prove your absolute faith in his brilliance. But since I own Jamal's debt entirely, you just handed the deed to your house directly to me. Diane let out a loud, piercing wail. She grabbed my father by the arm, shaking him violently. Richard! Tell me this is a nightmare! My mother shrieked, tears of genuine terror streaming down her face. Tell me she cannot take our house. We have lived there for 30 years. It is completely paid off. Tell her she cannot take it. My father did not answer her. He just stared blankly at the red-stamped foreclosure documents resting in the black leather briefcase. He knew exactly what he had done. He had let his arrogance and his blind worship of a con artist destroy the only financial security he had left in the world. You did not want to bridge a cash flow gap, I said, my voice echoing coldly over my mother's sobbing. You wanted to sacrifice my future to protect your golden child, but the only thing you sacrificed tonight was yourselves. I turned my gaze away from my devastated parents and looked up at my assistant. Claire, please distribute the financial summaries to the rest of the table, I said. Let them see exactly what they bought with their house. Claire reached into the briefcase and pulled out 3 bound folders. She placed one in front of my father, one by my mother, and the last one directly in front of Brittany. My father opened his folder with shaking hands. His eyes immediately darted across the highlighted columns. If you turn to page 3, I instructed, my voice cutting through their panic. You will see the complete transaction history of Apex Innovations. You will notice a glaring lack of revenue. That is because Jamal never built a software platform. He never hired a single engineer. But the initial seed money, Richard stammered, looking up in sheer confusion. The investors he showed us. They were just props in a classic Ponzi scheme, I replied coldly. Whenever Jamal ran out of cash to fund his lifestyle, he simply found a new gullible investor. He used their fresh capital to pay the minimum interest on his previous loans, pocketing the rest, to buy luxury cars and designer clothes. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul. And when the traditional lenders cut him off, he came to you. He used your house to secure the hard money loan that my firm just bought. Your life savings went directly into his checking account, and he spent it all. My mother let out a strangled gasp, burying her face in her hands. We are ruined, Diane sobbed. We have nothing left. Brittany was staring blankly at the folder in front of her. She had not opened it. She operated entirely on optics, unable to process balance sheets. She looked at Jamal, who was sweating profusely. Jamal, tell her she is lying. Brittany pleaded, her voice trembling with desperate denial. Tell her the company is real. We are supposed to go to the Hamptons next month. Jamal could not even look his wife in the eye. I reached back into the open briefcase. I bypassed the financial documents and pulled out a single glossy photograph. I held it face down for a brief moment, letting the tension reach a boiling point. The financial ruin is hard to process. Brittany, I said, shifting my attention to my sister. I know you do not care about spreadsheets. You only care about the image. So let us talk about your perfect marriage. I placed the photograph face up on the pristine white tablecloth. With my index finger, I slowly slid it across the smooth surface until it stopped directly over her closed financial folder. Brittany looked down. The color drained from her face instantly. The high-resolution photograph was taken by a private investigator my firm hired during our due diligence process. It showed Jamal standing outside the luxury penthouse I had mentioned earlier. He had his arms wrapped tightly around a blonde woman who looked barely old enough to drink. She was wearing a tiny designer dress, and draped around her wrist was the heavy diamond tennis bracelet paid for by my parents. They were laughing intimately, looking like a wealthy power couple. That is Lexi, I stated flatly. Your husband has been paying her rent for 6 months. While you were bragging to our parents about his tech empire, He was using their money to play sugar daddy to a 22-year-old influencer. The silence that followed was terrifying. Brittany did not cry. She did not whimper like my mother. She stared at the photograph, her entire body going rigidly still. A low, guttural sound began to build in the back of her throat. It was the sound of a woman whose carefully constructed universe had just violently exploded. Brittany slowly raised her head, her eyes locked onto Jamal. The golden child, the perfect sister, who had spent her entire life looking down on me, completely snapped. "You piece of trash!" Brittany shrieked. It was an ear-piercing scream that shattered the elegant atmosphere of the restaurant. Before anyone could react, Brittany lunged across the corner booth. She threw herself at Jamal, her manicured hands curled into tight fists. She slammed her fists directly into his chest, hitting him over and over again with shocking ferocity. Jamal yelped, raising his arms to protect his face as Brittany clawed at his expensive velvet blazer. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket and shook him violently. My mother screamed in horror, begging them to stop. Diners at the surrounding tables gasped, standing up to watch the violent spectacle. Jamal tried to push Brittany away, but she was consumed by feral rage. She swung wildly, her heavy diamond engagement ring catching his cheek and leaving a bright red scratch. Vince and the security team immediately rushed forward, but I held up my hand, signaling them to wait. I sat perfectly still, watching my sister physically destroy the man she claimed was infinitely better than me. Vince and the security team remained frozen at the edge of the velvet ropes, waiting for my command, as Brittany continued her frantic assault. Jamal finally managed to shove her backward, his chest heaving, his expensive velvet blazer visibly torn at the collar. He wiped a smear of bright blood from his scratched cheek, looking completely pathetic. Brittany stumbled back into the heavy wooden table, knocking over a crystal water glass that shattered violently against the imported marble floor. My father could no longer tolerate the absolute collapse of his perfect family image. Richard stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He reached out and grabbed Brittany by the shoulders, pulling her away from Jamal before she could lunge across the table again. "Stop it, Brittany!" My father barked, his voice shaking with a potent mixture of rage and terror. "Stop making a public spectacle of us right now. He is not worth it." Richard pushed his sobbing golden child into the arms of my mother, who was still weeping hysterically into her lace handkerchief. Then my father turned his attention back to me. He straightened his silk tie, attempting to summon the authoritative patriarchal presence he had wielded like a weapon for my entire life. But his hands were trembling violently, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been completely extinguished. He looked like an old, broken man who had finally realized the bridge he was standing on had already burned down to ashes. "Listen to me, Riley," my father said, his voice dropping into a desperate pleading register that I had never heard him use before. "We can fix this situation. We can handle this quietly like a family. I understand that you are angry and you have every right to be upset. Jamal is a complete fraud. He manipulated all of us. He lied to me, and he betrayed your sister in the worst way possible. We are going to completely cut him off. Brittany will file for divorce tomorrow morning." Jamal looked up from his torn jacket, his eyes wide with sudden betrayal. "Richard, you cannot do that," Jamal stammered. "We are in this together. You signed the papers too." "Shut your mouth," my father snapped, turning to glare at Jamal with pure venom. "You are nothing to this family anymore. You are a criminal and you are on your own." Richard quickly turned back to me, trying to maintain eye contact. He placed his hands flat on the wet white tablecloth, leaning forward to deliver his grand solution. "I will clean up this mess, Riley," he promised, his tone dripping with desperate negotiation. "I am not going to let this ruin our lives, or put your mother and me in federal prison over that forged trust fund document. I still have the house in Fairfield. It is a premium property in a highly desirable neighborhood. I will list the family home on the market tomorrow morning. I will sell it and use the proceeds to cover the $5 million hard money loan and replace your missing trust fund money. I will liquidate my entire life to pay your firm back every single penny." Just give me 30 days to close the sale and keep the authorities out of this." He stood there breathing heavily, waiting for me to accept his offer. In his mind, he was making the ultimate noble sacrifice. He truly believed he was still the master of his own destiny, stepping up to save his family from the brink of total destruction. He thought he still had one last valuable piece on the board to play. I looked at him for the long, silent moment. The sheer arrogance required to negotiate with assets you no longer controlled was staggering. I reached out and picked up the heavy manila folder resting near the center of the table. I slowly flipped it over to the blank back cover. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the dark blue ink of the handwritten contract my father had drafted just 20 minutes prior. "You cannot sell the family home, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly calm, echoing across the shattered dining room. Richard frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Of course I can," he argued defensively. "It is my property. The deed is entirely in my name. I will call my real estate broker tonight and list it." I shook my head slowly, sliding the folder closer to him so he could read his own handwriting. "You do not have a real estate broker anymore, Dad," I replied smoothly. "And you certainly do not have a deed. You already leveraged the house against his debt. When you took out the initial loans, you mortgaged the property to the absolute limit. The only thing you had left to your name was the remaining equity." I picked up the folder and held it up so the handwritten promissory note was directly in his line of sight. "And 20 minutes ago, right here at this very table, you wrote an unconditional, legally binding pledge transferring all remaining equity in your property to Apex Innovations," I explained, watching the last drop of color drain entirely from his face. "You did it to prove your absolute faith in your brilliant son-in-law. You did it to humiliate me in public." My father stared at his own signature, his mouth opening in a silent scream of horrific realization. But Apex Innovations is entirely insolvent. I continued delivering the final crushing blow with surgical precision. They defaulted. And since my firm, Apex Private Equity, purchased all of his distressed debt, we also acquired all collateral pledged against it. "Which means you cannot sell the house to pay me back, Dad, because I now own your house." The silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My father stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The arrogant patriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist for decades was completely broken, shattered by the weight of a single sentence. He looked down at his hands, then back at the folder, his mind frantically searching for a loophole that simply did not exist. "You cannot do this," my father finally choked out, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "The law protects homeowners. You cannot just take a house overnight. There is a legal process. There are hearings. You have to give us months of notice. I will call a lawyer. I will file an injunction." I leaned back in my chair, adjusting the heated towel around my shoulders. I looked at him with absolute pity. "A standard residential mortgage takes months to foreclose, Dad," I explained, keeping my voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. "But you did not sign a residential mortgage. You signed a commercial guarantee for an unregulated high-yield hard money loan. And when you forged my signature on those initial documents, you legally waived your standard residential tenant rights. You tied your personal property directly to a high-risk corporate venture." I nodded toward my assistant. Claire pulled a final sheet of paper from the briefcase and slid it across the table. It was a formal notice to vacate printed on heavy legal stock and stamped with the seal of the county clerk. "That is a court-ordered seizure warrant," I stated flatly. "The judge signed it this afternoon, the moment the default became official. By 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, my property management team will arrive at the Fairfield estate. They will be accompanied by the local sheriff. Every lock on the doors will be changed. The security system codes will be wiped. You and Mom have exactly 12 hours to drive home and pack whatever fits into your personal vehicles. Any furniture, artwork, or valuables left inside the house after 8 in the morning will be liquidated to cover the remaining balance of the corporate debt." Diane let out a horrific guttural wail, She clutched her chest, rocking violently back and forth in her chair. 12 hours! My mother screamed, her voice cracking with pure terror. We have lived there for 30 years, Riley. All my clothes, my jewelry, my antiques. We cannot pack a whole life in 12 hours. Where are we supposed to go? We have absolutely no money left. You should have thought about that before you mortgaged your life to fund his mistress, I replied coldly, pointing a finger directly at Jamal. Jamal flinched as if I had physically struck him. He was still bleeding slightly from the scratch on his cheek, his torn velvet blazer hanging off his shoulders like a ragged flag of surrender. He looked at the legal warrant sitting on the table, realizing the full scope of my power. What about my company? Jamal asked, his voice shaking uncontrollably. What about my servers, my equipment? I need my laptop to access the client files. I let out a short, sharp laugh, completely devoid of humor. You do not have a company anymore, Jamal, I said. You do not have any equipment. As we sit here right now, a federal asset recovery team is clearing out your leased office space. They are seizing every computer, every desk, and every single piece of hardware purchased with Apex Capital. Furthermore, my recovery agents tracked the GPS on your 2 luxury sports cars. The Lamborghini and the Porsche were loaded onto flatbed tow trucks 20 minutes ago. The luxury penthouse in Tribeca has already been padlocked. And the corporate credit cards you and Brittany have been using to fund your lavish lifestyle have been permanently terminated. Brittany gasped, frantically digging through her designer purse. She pulled out her heavy metal credit cards, looking at them as if they had suddenly turned into toxic waste. Everything is gone, Brittany whispered, her eyes wide with manic realization. The cars, the house, the money. It is all gone. It is entirely gone. I confirmed, ensuring the brutal reality sank deep into their bones. You are completely bankrupt, all of you. You built a fake empire on stolen money and forged signatures. Tomorrow morning you will wake up with absolutely nothing to your names except the clothes on your backs and the massive legal consequences of your own arrogant decisions. My father buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, heaving sobs. He knew that the moment the sheriff arrived tomorrow morning, the entire neighborhood would know the truth. The social status he had sacrificed his own daughter to protect was going to be publicly and violently destroyed. My father buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, heaving sobs. He knew that the moment the sheriff arrived tomorrow morning, the entire neighborhood would know the truth. The social status he had sacrificed his own daughter to protect was going to be publicly and violently destroyed. Slowly, Richard raised his heavy head. His eyes were bloodshot and swollen, the fierce patriarch completely replaced by a pathetic, broken man. He reached across the wide table, his hands trembling violently as he tried to grasp my arm. I leaned back calmly, letting his fingers grasp empty air. Riley, please, my father begged, tears spilling over his lower eyelids and tracking down his wrinkled cheeks. I am begging you on my knees. You have proven your point. You have shown us exactly how powerful you really are. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong about everything. Just please give me a 30-day extension. He gasped for air, his chest heaving under his silk tie. Let me call my lawyers in the morning, Richard pleaded. Let me find a private cash buyer for the estate so we can at least salvage some dignity and pay off the mortgage quietly. I will pay you back every single cent Jamal owes your firm. I will sign a confession. I will do whatever you want. Just do not send the county sheriff to our door. Do not make your mother and me homeless in front of all our friends. I looked at the man who had spent the last 30 years calling me a worthless spinster. The man who had forged my signature on federal bank documents and violently threatened to disown me just an hour ago was now openly weeping in a crowded luxury restaurant, pleading for my mercy. There is no 30-day extension, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. You waived your standard residential rights when you committed federal fraud to secure a commercial loan. The house belongs to my firm now. Seeing that my father's tears had absolutely no effect on my decision, My mother instantly changed her entire strategy. Diane realized the ship was rapidly sinking, and she was entirely prepared to throw anyone overboard to save herself. She suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly, and pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at Jamal. "This is all your fault!" Diane shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly through the silent dining room. "You disgusting lying con artist! You completely manipulated us. You tricked my poor husband into signing those legal papers. We only trusted you because you married our beautiful daughter, and you used our family to fund your filthy affairs with that 22-year-old girl." Jamal flinched violently, looking up at my mother in utter disbelief. "Diane, you knew about the shadow loans," Jamal stammered, his voice cracking. "You helped Richard forge the trust fund documents. You were the one who told me Riley did not need the money anyway." "Shut your mouth!" Diane screamed, slamming both of her hands flat onto the white tablecloth. "Do not you dare try to drag us down with you. We only did what you told us to do because you promised us a massive financial return. You preyed on our unconditional love for Brittany." Diane immediately turned her manicured hands toward me, pasting on a grotesque, desperate smile. "Riley, sweetheart, please listen to me." My mother pleaded, her eyes wide with manufactured innocence. "Your father and I are victims here too. Jamal completely brainwashed us. He is the monster who deserves to go to federal prison, not your own parents. You cannot punish us for the crimes of this horrible man. Let us come stay with you in your apartment until we get this terrible mess sorted out. We can be a real family again." The terrifying speed at which she threw her golden child's husband under the bus was breathtaking. For years, Diane had worshipped the ground Jamal walked on. Now she was ready to personally hand him over to the police if it meant she got to sleep in a warm bed. Brittany stared at our mother, completely horrified by the sudden betrayal. "Mom, how can you say those things?" Brittany cried out, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "He is my husband. He is a parasite!" Diane snapped back viciously, turning on her favorite daughter without a single second of hesitation. "And you were foolish enough to marry him. Look at what he has done to us. Look at the absolute ruin he brought to our doorstep." I sat back and watched the toxic ecosystem of my family completely consume itself. They were turning on each other like starving animals trapped in a cage. All the fake loyalty and forced family unity was completely gone, leaving only pure greed and desperate self-preservation. Seeing that her attacks on Jamal and Brittany were not magically producing a checkbook from my purse, my mother turned her frantic attention back to me. She leaned across the table, her hands clasped tightly together as if she were praying to a deity she had just remembered existed. "Riley." "Please," Diane begged, her voice taking on a desperate whining pitch that grated against my ears. "You cannot just sit there and watch us drown like this. We are your family. Blood is thicker than water. You have to forgive us. You cannot just abandon your own flesh and blood over money. We raised you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. You owe us a second chance." I looked at her, my expression hardening into absolute stone. The sheer audacity of her demanding loyalty after decades of relentless abuse and emotional neglect was almost laughable. She truly believed that a biological connection was a free pass to treat me like garbage. "Blood is thicker than water," I repeated slowly, letting the cliché phrase hang heavily in the air. "That is a very interesting choice of words, Mom, because my blood meant absolutely nothing to you 15 years ago." Diane blinked, her face freezing in genuine confusion. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her eyes darting nervously toward my father. "I am talking about the exact day I officially stopped viewing any of you as my family," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register that demanded the absolute attention of everyone at the table. I was 18 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night screaming in pure agony. My appendix had ruptured. I had to be rushed into emergency surgery. The doctors told you I nearly died on that operating table from the infection. My father looked away, suddenly finding the white tablecloth incredibly interesting. Brittany swallowed hard, looking down at her lap, suddenly unable to meet my gaze. When I woke up in the recovery room, I was entirely alone. I continued the memory still crisp and cold in my mind. I was heavily medicated, terrified, and in excruciating pain. The monitors were beeping loudly in the sterile room. I asked the attending nurse where my parents were. "Do you remember what she told me, Mom?" Diane opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stared at me with wide, guilty eyes, her hands trembling violently on the table. She told me my parents had left a note at the front desk. I said, my voice steady and merciless. The note said, "You had to leave the hospital because Brittany was feeling incredibly stressed about her upcoming college entrance exams, and you did not want to miss the non-refundable luxury spa weekend you had booked in the Hamptons. You left your 18-year-old daughter recovering from major abdominal surgery alone in a cold hospital room so your golden child could get a hot stone massage and a facial." The surrounding diners, who were still eavesdropping on our table, let out collective gasps of absolute disgust. My mother shrank back into her leather chair, her face burning with intense public humiliation. That was the exact moment I realized I had no family. I stated flatly, ensuring every word pierced her fragile ego. "You chose a spa day over my survival, so do not sit there and preach to me about blood being thicker than water. You severed those ties a long time ago. I am just finally signing the death certificate on this relationship." Before Diane could utter another pathetic excuse, the heavy glass doors of the main lobby swung open. The sharp, authoritative sound of heavy boots hitting the Italian marble floor echoed through the dining room. Two tall men wearing dark suits and stern expressions walked directly into the restaurant. Golden shields hung from heavy chains around their necks. They were plainclothes NYPD detectives, and their grim faces made it clear they were not here to enjoy the ambiance. They bypassed the host stand entirely. Vince, my head of security, met them halfway and gave them a subtle nod, gesturing directly toward our corner booth. My father saw the detectives approaching and let out a loud, defeated groan. He looked at the $6,000 dinner bill, still sitting on the silver tray in Mr. Cohen's hands. He assumed the absolute worst. "Oh my God!" Richard whispered, his hands shaking as he grabbed his empty wallet. "They actually called the police over the dinner bill. We are being arrested for a restaurant tab. Riley, please, I will scrub dishes. I will do anything. Just call them off." The two detectives reached our table. They did not even glance at my father or the unpaid bill. They walked straight past Richard, stepping right up to the chair where Jamal was slouched in absolute defeat. "Jamal," the lead detective said, his voice loud and commanding, echoing across the silent room. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back right now." Jamal froze, his eyes darting frantically between the two armed officers. "What is this?" Jamal squeaked, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "I did not do anything. It is just a simple misunderstanding with a commercial bank. You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny," the detective announced, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his leather belt. "The charges were formally filed with the district attorney earlier this afternoon by the legal department of Apex Private Equity. You have the right to remain silent." Jamal let out a loud, pathetic sob. He looked at me, his eyes wide with absolute terror, finally realizing that I had not just planned to humiliate him at dinner. I had orchestrated his total, permanent, and legal destruction. The lead detective grabbed Jamal by the shoulder, forcing him out of the heavy leather chair. Jamal's legs gave out instantly, and he practically collapsed against the edge of the table, sending a crystal water glass clattering to the floor where it shattered into 100 pieces. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists with a sharp metallic click that echoed across the dead-silent dining room. It was the sound of absolute finality. "Wait, please," Jamal begged, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic whine. "You do not understand. I am a CEO. I have investors. Richard, tell them. Diane, do something." He looked frantically at my parents, but Richard and Diane were completely paralyzed. Richard sat frozen in his seat, his eyes glazed over, staring blankly at the red-stamped foreclosure documents still resting on the white linen. The man who had commanded every room he ever entered, who had ruled our household with terrifying authority, was now a hollow, trembling shell. He had sacrificed his own flesh and blood, forged federal bank documents, and gambled away his 30-year retirement, all for the whimpering criminal currently being dragged to his feet by the NYPD. Richard knew that by tomorrow afternoon, his country club membership would be revoked, and his neighbors would be watching the sheriff seize his furniture. Diane did not even look at Jamal. She was staring at her own distorted reflection in the polished silver base of the table centerpiece, perhaps finally seeing the monster she had truly become. The realization that she had thrown her loyal daughter to the wolves for a man who had left them entirely destitute was finally crushing her under its immense, suffocating weight. There were no more fake tears, no more theatrical screams, just the silent, suffocating ruin of a woman who had lost absolutely everything. Her precious social standing was dead. "Brittany, babe, call my lawyer Jamal," pleaded, twisting his head frantically to look at his wife, as the second detective began reading him his Miranda rights. "Call the firm. Tell them it is a massive misunderstanding. I love you, babe. Help me." Brittany did not move a single inch to help him. She was pressed hard against the back of her heavy leather chair, her manicured hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles were stark white. She was hyperventilating, taking short, jagged breaths that made her designer silk scarf flutter erratically. The perfect, highly curated facade she had spent her entire life building was completely, irreparably shattered. There would be no Hampton's house. There would be no exclusive launch parties. There would only be the humiliating reality of being the bankrupt wife of a convicted federal fraudster. She looked at Jamal not with love, but with absolute visceral revulsion. "Get him away from me!" Brittany choked out her voice, barely a raspy whisper, shrinking back as the detectives pulled Jamal violently past her chair. Jamal let out a guttural, animalistic cry of despair. "Riley, I am sorry," he shouted, turning his desperate bloodshot eyes toward me. He was openly weeping now, snot running down his face, completely abandoning any remaining shred of his false dignity. "I will pay you back. I will work for you. I will scrub the floors of this hotel. Please just drop the federal charges. I do not want to go to prison." I remained perfectly still, casually adjusting the warm luxury towel around my shoulders. I looked down at him as the detectives forced him to walk. "You should have thought about federal prison before you bought your mistress a $60,000 diamond bracelet with my grandmother's trust fund," I replied coldly, my voice carrying zero empathy. "Enjoy your new cell, Jamal. I hear the aesthetic is very minimalist." The detectives jerked him forward roughly. Jamal stumbled, his expensive velvet blazer slipping off his shoulder, revealing the torn fabric underneath. They marched him through the center of the opulent dining room. The surrounding tables, filled with Manhattan's true elite, watched the spectacle in absolute silence. Billionaires, socialites, and real estate magnates stared as the fake tech visionary was paraded out in steel handcuffs. Nobody offered a single word of sympathy. They only offered looks of profound, icy disgust. Jamal's weeping echoed through the grand lobby until the heavy glass doors finally swung shut behind him, cutting off his pathetic cries entirely. The dining room slowly returned to life, a low murmur of conversation starting up again as wealthy patrons returned to their meals quickly, forgetting the man who had just lost his freedom. But at our corner booth, the silence was absolute and heavy. The $6,000 restaurant bill still sat on the silver tray in Mr. Cohen's hands. The foreclosure documents remained on the table. The damage was done, and it was entirely irreversible. My family sat in the terrifying wreckage of their own making. I did not offer them any parting words of sympathy or anger. There was absolutely nothing left to say. The heavy, suffocating silence at our table was the undeniable sound of my victory. I stood up slowly from my leather chair, moving with a calm, deliberate grace that completely contrasted their erratic panic. I took the heated luxury towel from my shoulders and handed it gently to Claire. I picked up my coat from the back of the seat. It was the same plain gray cashmere coat that Brittany had loudly mocked as cheap thrift store garbage just 2 hours ago outside the hotel entrance. I slipped my arms into the soft sleeves and methodically buttoned it up against the evening chill. My family did not try to stop me. They did not utter another plea or hurl another insult. My father was staring blankly at the table, completely broken. My mother was covering her face, rocking silently in her chair. My sister was trembling in profound shock, her perfect world entirely dismantled. They were completely consumed by the black hole they had aggressively dug for themselves. I turned my back on them and looked at my restaurant manager. "Mr. Cohen," I said softly, ensuring my voice carried the utmost respect for his professionalism. "I am incredibly sorry for the severe disturbance my guests caused in your dining room tonight. Please add a $20,000 gratuity to my personal corporate account and distribute it evenly among the floor staff, the security team, and the kitchen crew." They handled this unfortunate situation with absolute perfection. Mr. Cohen bowed deeply, placing his hand over his heart. "Thank you, boss," he replied smoothly. "Have a wonderful and safe evening." "And Mr. Cohen," I added, glancing over my shoulder one last time at the miserable group huddled in the corner booth, "make sure my father settles that $6,000 dinner bill before he leaves the premises. If he cannot secure the funds, you know exactly what protocol to follow." I did not wait for a response. I walked away from the table, my footsteps steady and purposeful. I moved across the imported Italian marble floor, passing beneath the soaring crystal chandeliers. I felt the gaze of the elite diners following me, but I kept my head held high. I did not look back at the wreckage. I pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors and stepped out into the crisp, cold Manhattan night. The city air felt remarkably clean, sharp, and invigorating. The doorman offered a highly respectful nod as I approached the curb. A moment later, my valet pulled my custom black Maybach smoothly up to the entrance. He hurried out and opened the heavy rear door for me. I stepped into the quiet sanctuary of the leather interior. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, instantly silencing the chaotic noise of the city outside. As the car pulled away from the curb, merging into the bright lights of the New York traffic, I leaned back against the plush seat. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of lightness. The toxic chains of my past, the heavy burdens of guilt and obligation that my family had strapped to my back since childhood, were completely gone. I was finally absolutely free. We are often taught from a very young age that family is everything. We are heavily conditioned to believe that blood requires unconditional loyalty, no matter how much pain and destruction that loyalty causes us. But financial abuse is rarely committed by strangers in dark alleys. More often than not, it is committed by the people sitting right across from you at the Thanksgiving dinner table. It is committed by the people who use the word family as a weapon to manipulate your guilt, drain your hard-earned resources, and keep you securely trapped in a cycle of subservient compliance. When you finally decide to stand up and set ironclad boundaries, the people who have profited from your lack of boundaries will call you selfish. They will call you cruel. They will try to convince you that protecting yourself is an unforgivable betrayal. Do not listen to their manipulations. Protecting your peace, your assets, and your future is never a betrayal. It is a fundamental right. Walking away from a toxic family is not a tragedy. It is the ultimate triumph. It is the defining moment you stop being a supporting character in their delusional drama and finally become the sole author of your own life. Have you ever had to walk away from family members who tried to use your success for their own selfish gain? How did you find the strength to set your boundaries and enforce them against people you once loved? I would love to hear your personal stories and triumphs in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you tonight, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, strength, and claiming your true worth. And if you know someone who is currently struggling with toxic family dynamics, share this video with them as a powerful reminder that they have the ability to rewrite their own ending. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, your worth is never defined by the people who refuse to see it, and your future belongs entirely to you. The story of Riley vividly illustrates a harsh but necessary truth that many of us are conditioned to ignore. Biological connection is not a free pass for emotional or financial abuse. Society constantly pushes the narrative that blood is thicker than water, grooming us to tolerate blatant disrespect, manipulation, and exploitation simply because the perpetrators happen to share our DNA. Through Riley's harrowing dinner experience, we see exactly how toxic family dynamics operate on the illusion of obligation. Her parents and sister weaponize the concept of family to extract resources, protect a fraudulent golden child, and tear down the one person who actually built a successful independent life. The profound lesson here is that loyalty must be earned through mutual respect and care, not extorted through lifelong guilt trips. When relatives only invoke the word family, when they desperately need a financial bailout or a convenient scapegoat, it is not love, it is parasitism. Riley's ultimate triumph was not merely about revealing her immense wealth, it was rooted in her unyielding refusal to play the obedient victim anymore. She teaches us that setting ironclad boundaries is an act of profound self-preservation. Walking away from people who consistently diminish your worth, even if they are your parents or siblings, is never an act of cruelty. It is an act of radical self-love and survival. We must normalize the reality that cutting toxic ties is sometimes the only way to protect our peace, our assets, and our future. True family builds you up and protects you. They do not forge your signature to fund their own delusions. Please share this reflection with someone who might be struggling with toxic relatives to remind them that protecting their peace is their absolute right.